My son-in-law gave me 1 week to decide whether I would sleep in the basement or find somewhere else to be. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went upstairs, called my attorney, and started packing the things that actually mattered. That was a Tuesday. By Saturday, I was gone, and everything they thought they were inheriting went with me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it really began. The roses along the back fence were the last thing my husband ever planted. Gerald set them in the ground the spring before his diagnosis, 12 bare root climbers he'd ordered from a catalog he'd been folding and unfolding since January. He wasn't much of a gardener, he was an accountant, precise and patient, but he wanted something that would outlast him, something I could look at. He never said that out loud, but I understood it the way you understand things after 38 years of sharing a life with someone. He died 11 months later. The roses came back every June without fail. I am Eleanor. I turned 64 last March. I taught high school English for 31 years, retired the spring, Gerald passed, and have spent the 2 years since learning how to be a person again, slowly, the way you learn to walk after a long illness. The house on Clover Hill Road was ours together. Now it was mine alone, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, Gerald's old study still smelling faintly of cedar, and the pipe tobacco he'd given up a decade before he died, but never fully aired out. I kept it that way on purpose. My daughter, my only child, called me on a Thursday evening in early October. Her voice had a particular texture that evening, the one I'd learned to recognize over 40 years, bright on the surface, slightly hollow underneath, like a drum someone was tapping too carefully. She asked how I was. I told her I was fine. She asked about my hip. I told her it was better. Then she said, "Mom, Marcus and I have been talking." Marcus was my son-in-law. They'd been married 4 years. He was not a bad man in the way villains are bad. He was the other kind, the kind who believes so thoroughly in his own logic that anyone who disagrees simply hasn't thought it through yet. My daughter told me they'd been priced out of their lease renewal. The landlord wanted $800 more per month. Marcus's business, some kind of digital consulting firm I never fully understood, had hit a rough quarter. They had a baby coming 6 months along, and they needed somewhere stable, somewhere with space, somewhere with a yard for the child to grow up in. I listened to all of this. Then she said, "Your house has 4 bedrooms, Mom. You're only using 2 of them." I want to be honest about something, because people always ask why a woman in her 60s lets her own home be taken from her, and the answer is never simple. It is not stupidity. It is not weakness, exactly. It is the particular terror of a mother who has already lost one person she loved more than her own comfort, and who cannot bear the thought of losing another. My daughter was pregnant. She was, in her own way, frightened. And somewhere inside me, underneath every reasonable instinct I possessed, was a woman who would do almost anything to keep her child close. I told her they could come for 3 months, just until they found their footing. Marcus would contribute to utilities. My daughter would help around the house. Those were the terms, and we agreed to them on a Thursday evening, while the autumn light came through my kitchen window and the roses, past their season, drooped quietly against the fence. They arrived with a moving truck. I had expected boxes, suitcases, perhaps a few pieces of furniture for the spare room. What pulled into my driveway that Saturday morning was a 26-foot rental truck, 2 of Marcus's friends, and enough flat-pack furniture to fill a showroom. I stood on the porch with my coffee and watched them carry in a sectional sofa, a standing desk, a smart television the size of a dining table, a coffee maker that cost more than my first car payment in 1985. My daughter came up the porch steps and hugged me. She smelled of the same shampoo she'd used since college, and for a moment I held her and let myself believe this would be fine. "We brought most of our stuff," she said. "Storage units are so expensive. I hope that's okay." I looked at the truck. "Where are you planning to put all of it?" She smiled the way she did when she was 8 years old and had already done the thing she was asking permission for. "We thought maybe Gerald's study could be Marcus's office. And the living room furniture yours is getting a little worn, don't you think? We figured we'd just swap it out." Gerald's study. The room with the cedar smell. The room where I sometimes went at night and simply sat. "That room stays as it is," I said. My voice was quiet. I made sure of it. She nodded quickly. Of course. We'll figure something out." They figured something out. By the following Wednesday, Marcus's standing desk was in the study. The cedar smell was gone within a week, replaced by the plasticky warmth of electronics and takeout containers. I told myself it was temporary. The garden was what I could not make temporary in my mind. I had kept it for 2 years as a kind of conversation with Gerald, a way of honoring the last thing his hands had touched with intention. Every spring, I pruned the roses back the way he'd shown me, cutting at the outward-facing bud eyes, leaving enough cane to climb. Every summer, they came back. It was the most reliable thing in my life after he died. In November, Marcus came to me in the kitchen. He poured himself a cup of my coffee without asking, which I had grown accustomed to, and leaned against the counter with the expression he used when he was about to explain something to me. "Eleanor," he said, "I've been thinking about the backyard." I put down the dish I was drying. "The layout isn't great for a kid," he said. "All those thorny bushes along the fence, that's a liability with a toddler. And we're going to need more usable space. A patio, maybe, something level." "Those are roses," I said. "They've been there for 4 years." I know. But honestly, they're kind of overgrown, and the fence line would look a lot cleaner without them." I looked at him for a long moment. Gerald planted those roses. He had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. I know that, and I respect that. But we have to think practically. We're starting a family here. "You're staying here temporarily," I said, "until you find your footing." That was the agreement. He smiled at me the way adults smile at children who don't yet understand how the world works. Right. We'll talk more about it." I did not think he would actually do it. That was my mistake. I underestimated the certainty of a man who had never in his adult life encountered a consequence he could not negotiate his way out of. I woke on the last Saturday of November to the sound of a power tool. I came downstairs in my robe. Through the kitchen window, I could see Marcus in the backyard in a fleece jacket, a crowbar in his hand. One of his friends from the moving truck crouched beside the fence. The roses, all 12 of them, the ones Gerald had ordered from a catalog he'd been folding since January, were already lying in a pile at the side of the yard, their long canes tangled together like something broken. The roots were still attached. Some of them still had the last small rosebuds of the season, brown at the edges now, gone soft with the cold. I walked out the back door in my slippers. "What are you doing?" I said. It was not a question. It didn't have the shape of one. Marcus turned. He had the slightly flushed look of a man in the middle of a project who does not want to stop. "Hey, Eleanor, we're getting an early start. Figured we'd get the fence line cleared before it gets too cold." Those were Gerald's roses. "I know. And I told you no." He shifted his weight. His friend stood up from his crouch and looked at the ground. "Eleanor, I hear you, but we talked about this. The space doesn't work for a baby, and we need to think long-term." "You are not living here long-term," I said. "You are a guest in my house. Those were my husband's roses, and I told you no." He looked at me then with something I had not expected. Not cruelty, something colder. Patience. The look of a man who has already decided what the outcome will be and is simply waiting for the other person to exhaust themselves. "Maybe," he said carefully, "we should talk about the arrangement, because honestly, the way things are set up right now isn't sustainable. This house is too big for one person. Sylvia and I have a family coming. It makes more sense for us to be running the household. You're 64. You should be somewhere you can relax. There are some really great communities, nice ones, not like the old places. My aunt lives in one, and she loves it." I stood in my backyard, in my slippers, on the cold November ground, and looked at the tangled pile of rose canes, and looked at my son-in-law, and understood, with complete and sudden clarity, exactly what had been in motion since that Thursday phone call 2 months ago. I went back inside. I put on the kettle. I sat at the kitchen table and drank my tea and did not speak to anyone for the rest of the morning. I want to be honest about this part too, because I think people want the story to be that I was immediately strong, that I knew exactly what to do. I was not immediately strong. I sat at that table and I grieved, the way you grieve when something makes you understand that a loss you thought was finished is, in fact, still happening. I was not grieving the roses anymore. I was grieving the version of myself who had believed, for 54 days, that her daughter was just scared and her son-in-law was just thoughtless, and that love would be enough to hold it together. Then the kettle finished and I poured my second cup, and I thought about Caroline. Caroline Foss had been my closest friend for 22 years. She had moved the previous spring to a small property outside Asheville, an old farmhouse on 3 acres she'd been slowly restoring. She sent me a postcard in August with her handwriting slanting uphill the way it always did. "The light here is something else, Eleanor. There's a cottage behind the main house. Always here if you need to breathe." I'd tucked the postcard between the cookbooks on the second shelf. I went and found it now and set it on the table beside my tea. That afternoon, I called my attorney. His name was Douglas Reeves. He had handled my estate planning after Gerald died, a quiet, methodical man who wore the same style of blue tie to every appointment and never once made me feel rushed. I told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I'll need you to come in. There are several things we can move quickly on, if that's what you want." "It is," I said. "Monday morning?" "Monday morning." I hung up. Then I went upstairs to Gerald's study, Marcus's office now, with his desk and his monitors and his takeout containers, and I found what I'd come for. In the bottom drawer of Gerald's old filing cabinet, which Marcus had shoved to the corner and was using as a makeshift monitor stand, was a small wooden box. Inside it were Gerald's financial notebooks, his handwritten ledgers from 30 years of careful accounting, and underneath them, 2 documents I needed, the property deed and a letter Gerald had written me the winter before he died. "In case I'm not there to say it, this house is your life, and your life is yours. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I had read that letter many times. I folded it now and put it in my coat pocket. That evening, my daughter came downstairs while I was making dinner. She moved carefully, the way she had for the last few months. One hand sometimes resting on her belly without her seeming to notice. She looked tired in the particular way of pregnancy, a tiredness that lives behind the eyes. She sat at the kitchen table and said, "Marcus told me about this morning." "Did he? Mom, did he tell you what he did to the roses?" She was quiet for a moment. "He said they were overgrown. He said you got upset." I turned from the stove. "Your father planted those roses the spring before he died. I told your husband no. He did it anyway." She looked at her hands. "He's just trying to make this work." "I know what he's trying to make work," I said. My voice was even. I had decided by then that I was done spending my voice on anything that would not change the outcome. "And I know what you're trying to make work. I understand it better than you think." She started to say something. I turned back to the stove. "Dinner's in 20 minutes, I said. "Why don't you rest until then?" Monday came with a gray sky and the smell of coming snow. I dressed carefully, the way I used to dress for parent conferences when I needed to remind the room that I was not a woman to be managed. I drove to Douglas Reeves's office and sat across from him for 2 hours. By the time I left, we had begun the process of transferring the property into a family trust with terms that made any unilateral claim on it by anyone other than me legally impossible. We had reviewed Gerald's investment accounts, which were entirely in my name and had been for 6 years. We had discussed the Clover Hill Road property's valuation, its equity, and my options going forward. Douglas slid a folder across his desk. "Take your time reading through these," he said. "But Eleanor, you're in a very strong position." "I know," I said. "Gerald made sure of that." Douglas nodded slowly. "He was a thorough man. The most thorough person I ever knew," I said. On the way home, I stopped at the nursery on Route 9. I bought 12 bare root roses, the same variety Gerald had planted, because I had kept the catalog. I put them in the trunk of my car. They were not for the backyard on Clover Hill Road. I told my daughter on a Wednesday. I chose a time when Marcus was on a call behind the study door, because I wanted to speak to my daughter alone, and I wanted to speak to her like a mother. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, and I told her what I was going to do. I was moving in January. I had secured a place, a month-to-month arrangement with Caroline, while I decided my next step, which was likely the Clover Hill property converted and leased. I had spoken to Douglas. The house was not going to be available to them, not as a permanent home, not without an agreement that reflected a fair market lease. She stared at me. "You're leaving. I'm choosing myself," I said. "The same way you chose Marcus and your life. I'm not angry at you for that. But I'm not staying in my own home and being told where I'm allowed to sleep." Her eyes filled. "Mom, we never said." "Your husband told me I should consider an assisted living community," I said. "He said this house was too big for one person. He cut down your father's roses without my permission." Those things happened. I'm not asking you to agree with my interpretation. I'm telling you what I witnessed. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. The baby moved, I could see it, the subtle shift of her whole body around a life growing inside her. Despite everything, my heart ached for her. Not for what was being lost, but for what she was going to have to figure out on her own. The door is never closed, I said quietly. Between us. Not because of him, not because of this. You are my daughter, but I will not be managed out of my own life, and I will not teach you that the right thing to do is let someone manage you out of yours. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she put her hands flat on the table and breathed slowly, the way she'd always done since childhood, when she was trying not to cry in a public place. I didn't know he said that to you, she said finally. About the community. I know you didn't, I said. I think there's quite a bit you didn't know. I packed over 3 weeks, a little each day, while the house continued to run its new rhythms around me. Marcus ordered dinner every night. My kitchen, which I had cooked in for 21 years, now smelled of delivery containers. The study door was closed from 9 to 6. The sectional sofa, enormous and pale gray, took up 3/4 of the living room where my furniture used to be. I found, as I packed, that the house was already letting me go. That's the only way I can describe it. The rooms felt different. No longer held my name in the way they had when Gerald and I moved in, when my daughter was 6 years old and ran through the hallways in her socks. A house absorbs the life you live in it, and when the life changes, the house changes. I was no longer the life this house was absorbing. I was a residue, a leftover, as Marcus might have said, though he had not yet said it to my face. The morning I left, I came downstairs at 6. The house was quiet. I had already loaded the car the day before, the things I couldn't leave. Gerald's financial notebooks, the wooden box, the letter, the photograph albums, my mother's quilt, the chipped blue mixing bowl I'd used for every birthday cake my daughter ever had. The things I was leaving had been inventoried and documented by Douglas's office. I made coffee. I poured a cup. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, at the bare fence line where the roses had been, the cold, hard ground where 12 root balls had been ripped out of the earth. I reached into the tote bag by the door and took out the brochure I'd been keeping in there for 2 weeks, not for an assisted living community, for a raised bed gardening workshop at the Botanical Garden outside Asheville, 10 minutes from Caroline's farmhouse. A Wednesday morning program, February through May. Reconnect with the ground beneath you, it said on the front. I put it in my coat pocket next to Gerald's letter. Then I picked up my bag and my keys, left the coffee cup on the counter full, warm, untouched, like something waiting to be appreciated, and walked out the front door. I didn't look back at the house. I had already said goodbye to it the night before. Alone, going room to room in the dark, running my hand along the door frames the way you touch a shoulder before you leave. Caroline's farmhouse was everything the postcard had promised, and more. The cottage behind the main house had a wood stove, 2 deep-silled windows that looked east, a narrow porch where the light came in at angles in the morning and made the whole room golden. My first night I sat on that porch with a wool blanket and a cup of chamomile and listened to the kind of silence that is not empty but full of wind and owls and the particular breathing of land that has been left mostly alone. I planted the roses in February along the south-facing wall of the cottage. The ground was still cold but workable. My hands knew what to do. Gerald had shown me enough times. I pressed each one in carefully, firmed the soil, watered slowly. They would not bloom until June. I would be there in June. The letter arrived in March. No return address. My daughter's handwriting on the envelope, but when I opened it, the handwriting inside was different. I recognized it the way you recognize a voice you've known all your life, but haven't heard in a long time. Mom, I don't know if you'll read this. You have every right not to. I want to tell you about the morning after you left. I came downstairs, and there was a coffee cup on the counter, full. I don't know why it undid me. I just stood there and cried for a long time. Marcus came down and asked what was wrong, and I tried to explain, and I couldn't. That was when I understood something I should have understood much earlier. He called Douglas Reeves the afternoon you left. I heard some of it through the study door. I'm not going to say what he said, it doesn't matter now. What matters is what I did after. I called Douglas myself. He told me, gently, that there was nothing to be done. He told me you had been thorough. I've been thinking about that word. Thorough. You and Dad both. I'm not asking to come back to what we had before, because I think that would be a lie. I am asking if there is something else, something smaller, maybe, that we could build. I am asking if you would let me call you sometimes. I am asking if, when the baby comes, I can send you photographs. I'm not defending what happened. I spent too long not seeing what Marcus was doing to our relationships, including ours. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to understand my part in it. I still have the birthday cake bowl, the chipped blue one. I noticed you didn't take it. I have been keeping it on the counter. Your daughter. I folded the letter carefully and sat with it for a while. Outside, the February light fell flat and silver over the dormant garden. The rose canes I'd planted were bare and brown and looked like nothing at all, just thin sticks in the ground. You had to know what was inside them, what they were already doing underground, slow and invisible and sure. I found a notepad in the kitchen drawer. I wrote back on a single page, and I kept it short, because the important things often are. I read it, twice. Call me on Sunday afternoons. I'm usually on the porch by 3. I'd like the photographs. Love, Mom. Caroline drove me to the post office. On the way back, she didn't ask what I'd sent, and I didn't tell her. We stopped for coffee at the diner on Merriweather Street where the waitress remembered her order without asking, and we sat in a window booth and watched the town go by. You look different, Caroline said. Different how? She considered this, like someone who just finished a very long book and is deciding whether to read it again. I laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes up from somewhere low and feels like it's cleaning something. I'm not sure I'd read it again, I said. No, she agreed. But you finished it. That matters. Spring came the way it always does, first in the smell of the soil, before anything is actually visible, and then in small, sudden bursts of green, and then all at once in a way that always surprises you even though you knew it was coming. The botanical garden workshop started in the first week of February, and by March, I knew the names of the 6 other women who came every Wednesday. Harriet, who had grown dahlias for 40 years and spoke about them like old friends. June, who was learning to grow vegetables for the first time at 71 and treated every sprouted seed like a personal triumph. Patricia, who drove 40 minutes each way and said it was worth it because the workshop was the only place she ever turned her phone face down. I taught them what Gerald had taught me about roses, the bud eyes, the outward-facing cuts, the patience required for bare roots. Harriet said I should have been a horticulturalist. I told her I was an English teacher, and she said, well, it was the same skill, really. Showing people what was already inside a thing, waiting. On a Wednesday evening in early June, I walked out to the cottage's south wall as the light fell warm and low and the air smelled of grass and something sweeter underneath it. And I stopped. The first rose had opened. It was the deep pink variety Gerald had chosen, what the catalog called climber, vigorous, repeat blooming. The bloom was perfect. No, that's not the right word. It was specific, the particular shade of pink that had run along my back fence for 4 years. The color of the last thing my husband's hands planted on purpose. I stood there long enough that Caroline came looking for me. She appeared around the corner of the cottage and stopped when she saw my face. She didn't say anything. She stood beside me, and we looked at the rose together. And the evening light held everything gently, the way good light does, not erasing the shadows, but making them bearable. My daughter called that Sunday. Her voice was different, not the hollow bright of that first October evening, but something less performed. Quieter. She told me the baby was moving constantly now, pressing up against her ribs when she tried to sleep. I told her that she had done exactly the same thing in 1983 and that her father had narrated every kick like a sports commentator until I threatened to make him sleep on the couch. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes up from somewhere low. We talked for an hour and 15 minutes. When she said goodbye, she said, I'll call next Sunday. I'll be on the porch at 3, I said. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the doorway of the cottage, my feet on the porch step, the evening air moving gently over the garden. The roses were in their first full bloom now, climbing, holding to the wall with the quiet determination of things that know they are exactly where they are supposed to be. I have learned in the last year of my life that the most dangerous thing about being needed is that it can disguise itself as being loved. I spent decades learning the difference between the two in my classroom: students who needed a grade, students who needed to be heard, students who didn't yet know which one they were asking for. I thought I had understood the lesson thoroughly. I had not. You can know something and still have to learn it again. In a different room, with different light. What I know now, in a way that lives in my body and not just my mind. A home is not a place that tolerates you. It is a place where your name is said with tenderness by the rooms themselves, by the light that hits a particular corner in a particular season, by the smell of the soil you have worked with your own hands, by the sound of a door you've opened 10,000 times. I lived in such a home for 21 years, and I let it go not because I was weak, but because I loved someone who was frightened. And love will ask you to do things that cost you. The cost was real. I do not pretend it wasn't. But I am 64 years old, and I am sitting on a porch in the mountains with coffee going cold beside me and 12 roses in full bloom against a stone wall. And my daughter's voice is still in my ear from Sunday, and somewhere in a drawer inside is a letter I have read 4 times and will read again, and my hands know how to do things they did not know how to do a year ago. I used to think that starting over was a young person's story, that there was a kind of grace period for beginning again, and that it closed around 50 or so, after which the options narrowed to endurance. I was wrong about that. I have been wrong about more things than I care to list. But that one I am glad to have corrected. The roses will climb this wall and keep climbing. In October I will cut them back properly, the outward-facing bud eyes, the long canes left to winter. In March I will watch the first red tips push out of the brown wood, which always looks, until the very last minute, like nothing is happening at all. I have learned to trust that.